I really dug deeply into, okay, so why can't I tolerate gluten anymore? And I started getting better, and I went to a conference, and at the conference, some scientists were talking about gluten sensitivity, and we don't know where this epidemic's coming from. And one of the researchers said, well, it doesn't seem that it actually is the gluten. We think it's something else that's on the wheat or the grain. And so I was like, oh my gosh. And suddenly my whole world changed. I was like, I think that this is what they're spraying on it. And so it was really that moment of that researcher saying, I think it's something else. And so I actually went up to the microphone and I said, do they spray anything on this? Do they spray Roundup? And I really knew very little. And they were like, what? And all the scientists turned around and the doctors, and they're like, they spray Roundup on our wheat? And then one of the head scientists from General Mills happened to be at that conference. And so he pulled me aside and he said, yeah, they're spraying Roundup on our wheat to dry it before harvest. And I was like, well, that's not good. That's probably the problem. And he said, yeah, we know that there's a problem, but it's going to take 2 decades to change the practices of the farmers to get them to stop using it. And I was like, well, in 2 decades, no one's gonna be able to tolerate gluten, if that's truly the connection here.
It might not be the gluten that is causing you leaky gut, causing bowel problems, causing brain fog and fatigue and all the symptoms that you might be feeling. It may actually be the chemicals that are being sprayed on the wheat while it's being grown and before it's harvested. True story. I don't know if you have heard of the word glyphosate, but we are learning that the chemical glyphosate is being linked to leaky gut, cancer, brain fog, tingling in the hands and the arms, headaches, and even cognitive challenges like ADHD and Alzheimer's. Curious, right? Kelly Ryerson is known as the Glyphosate Girl. And what I love about Kelly is Kelly came to a point in her life where her health completely fell apart. And she did all the tests. She went to a number of different doctors and nothing was helping. In fact, it was getting worse. It was getting so bad that they thought it might be psychological problems, until she recognized and discovered that her health challenges might actually be linked to gluten. And as she dug into it more, she realized that her health challenges might not just be linked to gluten, but what's being sprayed on gluten and on our foods as we grow them. And from that, she dove into science. She dove into research to understand how our food is grown and the impact that the chemicals are having on the food that we grow. And she was able to reverse all of her health conditions just by changing her diet to an organic diet and taking gluten out of her diet. She's out to educate as many people as she can about the amazing impact changing our diet, changing our foods can have on our health. Kelly has an MBA from Stanford, has worked for NASA, and she's an integrative health coach. She's really excited to share her story with you about how her health fell apart, what she had to do to put it back together, and some of the solutions that we can do to turn our health around. I'm Natalie Force-Bauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soil magazine. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. If you haven't subscribed to Heart and Soil yet, I invite you to hop on over to heartandsoilmagazine.com and grab yourself a subscription and join our community. It is a place where we amplify regenerative farming, gardening, and living for your health and for planetary health. We interview and feature experts and scientists, leaders, farmers, and gardeners from around the world. It's an amazing community, and we would love to have you join us. Thanks for tuning into this conversation with Kelly. We really appreciate and value your time. Enjoy the conversation and make yourself an amazing day. Kelly, thanks for joining me today. I am really excited to have a conversation with the Glyphosate Girl.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy this worked out.
Yeah, me too. I love how we're both wearing turtlenecks. Where are you?
No, well, I'm in just outside of San Francisco. So it's not freezing, but it feels like it is for me.
That's right. You're acclimatized. I'm actually where it is cold. I'm in southeastern Saskatchewan.
Oh, wow. It is cold.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very cold where you are.
Yeah. I don't know what it is today. Let me see. It's, I don't know, minus 10, 11. So
Oh,
not
geez.
so bad, but
Oh,
cold
gosh.
enough. Yeah.
Do you even bother going outside much?
Some days I do. I really do. I actually work out. My gym is outside in a old shack. And then I do like to walk outside in the cold, and also sometimes I'll meditate outside in the cold just
Oh,
because.
oh gosh. Like the monks not feeling the temperature.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I don't
Meanwhile,
I
I'm like nice and I make a nice hot bath, magnesium bath, and I get in there, and that's where I do my meditation.
nice.
Like the opposite of you. I think you're more impressive.
Yeah, I do that. And when it gets when we have more snow on the ground, I'll do that. I'll run from the hot bath out into the snow, and then the hot bath out into
Oh,
the snow.
that's supposed to be really good for you.
It's really, yeah, it feels so good too.
Oh, I
Yeah,
bet.
amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. My dad has been a long time fan of yours. I grew up in an organic and biodynamic farm, and he's super passionate about glyphosate. And his slogan is actually, "For life's sake, ban glyphosate."
Oh,
He
that's a
posts that.
good one. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, he has a t-shirt with it on. He's like, anybody can use it. But it's, yeah, anyways, he's a big fan because you are doing a really good job at helping us understand what glyphosate is. I mean, half of us can't even say it. It's a big word and it's confusing. And you're helping us understand the impact that glyphosate is having on our health. And that's part of where I want to take the conversation today. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, it's a chemical that very few people really need to know about until they need to know about it. That's sort
Mm.
of my feeling.
So tell me about that then.
So, so I got into all of this because I, like many, it seems women, but women and men, had some chronic health issues, and the issues weren't responding to Western medicine, and it was a bunch of different symptoms. So I had um, like numbness in my hands and my arms and my legs. I had major fatigue. My eyesight was poor. I had rashes and sinus problems and digestive problems. And it really was every day a new symptom. And
Mhm.
so I'd go to the doctor. And I mean, if someone presents like, every few days with something new, you start thinking that maybe, they're a hypochondriac or what have you. But the things that were happening to me are things that like I couldn't even imagine up. And so I went to tons of specialists for these various things, so neurologist and endocrinologist, and tried all these different things, a lot at Stanford Hospital, and I was given a lot of drugs, and the drugs had side effects, and I was just becoming a really huge mess. And particularly when the doctors were saying that it must be a psychological condition because they can't find anything in my blood work to say that what's wrong with me. And I had an MRI, and that there was nothing wrong with me there, and it was really just insanity inducing. And so finally I went to see a psychiatrist because I was on all these, I was not on all these, but I was on two antidepressants and a benzodiazepine. And I went to see a psychiatrist, and he happened to have intake blood work, and he had a vitamin panel on it. And he wasn't even a functional integrative psychiatrist. He just happened to have that.
Mhm.
And so it came back, and I was extremely deficient in vitamins, like vitamin C, just none to be found. Like it was literally a zero. No B12, B1, thiamine gone, D just abysmal. The list of things was just really shocking. And what's amazing is then I went back to my primary care doctor, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look what I found. And they're like, well, that really wouldn't have those kind of that couldn't cause anything in you. And I'm like, but I looked online, and you should never say you looked online. But I looked online, and these vitamin deficiencies are really real. They can cause all kinds of conditions. Like, well, no, that's sort of overstated. So I didn't stop with that. I finally found a doctor who suggested that I go gluten-free. And so
Mhm.
I did. And I really dug deeply into, okay, so why can't I tolerate gluten anymore?
Mm.
And I started getting better, and I went to a conference, and at the conference some scientists were talking about gluten sensitivity, and we don't know where this epidemic's coming from. And so a doctor said, or one of the researchers said, well, it doesn't seem that it actually is the gluten. We think it's something else that's on the wheat or the grain. And so I was like, oh my gosh. And suddenly my whole world changed. I was like, I think that this is what they're spraying on it. And so
okay, wait a second. Let's stop that. I have
yeah.
goosebumps from head to toe. Like if I had shorter hair, it would be standing up on the scalp. It's so profound. So tell me about that moment though, Kelly, when you're like, how did you link it to something they're spraying on the food?
So it's funny because I can't even, it was something, I'm not someone that was coming from an organic background. Like we ate fine growing up, but I ate plenty of junk. I had my Chick-fil-A and stuff when I'd be traveling, not in California, sadly at the time. But I did remember from Facebook seeing someone post at some point just sprayers on crops. And I thought, oh, wow, that isn't great. I wonder if I'm eating that. But then I just kind of left it there.
Yeah.
And it was really that moment of that researcher saying, I think it's something else. And so I actually went up to the microphone and I said, do they spray anything on this? Do they spray Roundup? And I really knew very little. And they were like, what? And all the scientists turned around and the doctors, and they're like, they spray Roundup on our wheat? And so I was like, well, I don't know. I actually don't know. I'd have to look into it. And I felt kind of embarrassed because I was like, what if they don't, And, and so I went and sat down. And then one of the head scientists from General Mills happened to be at that conference. And so he pulled me aside and he said, yeah, they're spraying Roundup on our wheat to dry it before harvest. And I was like, well, that's not good. That's probably the problem. And he said, yeah, we know that there's a problem, but it's going to take 2 decades to change the practices of the farmers to get them to stop using it. And I was like, well, in 2 decades, no one's gonna be able to tolerate gluten if that's truly the connection here. But actually, I have to say that I appreciated the General Mills people had identified the problem they were already ahead. And this was 5 years ago now. And I think things have accelerated in awareness. But at the time, it just didn't feel like anyone would possibly know. So it was shocking. And I immediately from that point on was like, I just started looking frantically through PubMed, which is a database of a bunch of published scientific papers. And like, there must be someone that studied this, there must be. And there was one person who I found, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who had been working on this for a long time, actually. And she was really sweet. So I happened to be in Boston anyway. She was at MIT. And so like a few months later, I was in her office and she just like did a mind dump of like everything she knew about glyphosate. And so that really kicked me off.
That is awesome. That is so cool. And so what did that feel like when you made that connection? Like when you validated that what you thought might be true was linked?
Well, so then, there's so much in the way, like Monsanto, who originally manufactured and put glyphosate out into the world. Now they were acquired by Bayer. But they have put so much information out there to discredit people that have tried to make this connection. And so if you go online, there'll be plenty of articles about gluten sensitivity and Roundup or glyphosate, but it was to say, this is ridiculous. There's no science that shows this. And at the time, I didn't know that about front groups or paid articles or, paid research to contradict whatever, to ensure that they would support this chemical over anything so that the public opinion would stay pro-chemical. And so it took a while.
So what's a front group or a paid article? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of companies will have this in these kind of controversial industries. So pharma has it and agriculture has it and oil and gas has it. And they will hire PR teams to be sure that the public message wherever you might go is pro their product. So it's really scary because you really have to dig really far to get information. So there are a few, actually there are probably 10 front groups for the agricultural chemical industry. And all supported by either the company or the lobby groups. And they will go on and their websites just dedicated to glyphosate and GMOs One of them that's quite famous that the PR group Ketchum put out there is GMO Answers. And so what that is to make sure that anyone who's like, oh, I'm worried about GMOs and my health will land on that. And they've paid a bunch of academics from universities that look super credible to come on and defend their products, so that will get into the mentality of people. And in fact, to the point that I've had people come over to me and say, you're wrong. Like, I looked up this website, genetic literacy. That sounds really weighty, actually. Genetic literacy, that's a great name. And I'm like, genetic literacy, what on earth? Oh my gosh, they're totally paid by Monsanto, now Bayer, to defend glyphosate among other things. And so that made the whole journey really, really hard. And anyone that had come out, like these scientists that had come out in like bravely saying the problems with glyphosate and GMOs, have been so attacked at that point online that if you were going and researching, you'd be like, oh, that person, they must be crazy. They're so wrong. Wow, I can't believe I almost believed what they were saying. So the hill is very steep in terms of getting information out.
Man, so how does a person find information like legitimate or verified or trustworthy information linking glyphosate to our health?
So one thing that I ended up having to do is just go directly to the scientific literature myself. And I'm not a scientist, but the nice thing is on these research papers, there will always be an abstract and a conclusion. And if you read that, you can suss out what their key determinations were in the study. So really, it's accessible to anyone. But it takes a long time to dig through. And if you go to those papers and the people by and large have to, whoever the authors are, have to say what their conflicts of interest might be. And so a lot of times you'll go and you'll see things like, Monsanto paid for this, or CropLife paid for this, or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation paid for this. And oftentimes you'll see it linked to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because they are huge proponents of chemical agriculture, and actually have backed the Cornell Alliance for Science, which is an organization out of, the prestigious Ivy League institution, Cornell University. So, I mean, there you go. So, who wouldn't trust what's coming out of that place? But really, it's a front group for the agricultural chemical industry. So that is definitely one place. But even there, you have to be careful. And with the lawsuits that came up with the Monsanto Roundup cancer lawsuits, a lot was revealed in those discovery documents. And one of the interesting things was just how successfully Monsanto was able to get away for years with ghostwriting articles and not saying that they paid for them. So it really took the lawyers a lot of time to dig through these papers and be like, oh my gosh, here they're saying we'll pay you so many $100,000 to write this paper that shows that glyphosate doesn't cause cancer. And then they do that and then they publish it. And then the EPA would rely upon that paid research to say, oh, look, glyphosate's fine. All bought by industry. So you have to be quite the detective to get to the bottom of it all.
Yeah. And when can you give us a couple of examples of websites? You said PubMed. Is there anywhere else that we could look and source some of these?
I really like PubMed. I actually, right now, I'm building a site, Glyphosate Facts.
Awesome.
And hopefully by the end of the year, end of January, it should be up with all this information, because I haven't been able to find something that really lays it all out like that. I do really like, there's not going to be comprehensive information, but I really trust the Center for Food Safety is a great organization that has good information. And Beyond Pesticides is another. And interestingly, I think if you keep your eye on the Rodale Institute, I went to a conference recently there that was a healthcare conference. And it was fantastic because there were a bunch of practitioners and doctors and nurses, and learning about, okay, these are the things in the field, and this is the connection with soil to the health. And so I can imagine them getting more into this area as well.
That's awesome. So what are some of the consequences, the health consequences that are being linked to glyphosate Roundup being sprayed on our food? And I'll go beyond being sprayed on our food, being used on our lawns and in our home gardens as well, and on our sidewalks and on our driveways. So what are some of the health consequences of that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll just start with like, so I learned about all the blow by blow of what this chemical can do by sitting in the courtroom during the cancer trials. So I'll start with cancer. Um,
Mm.
and what makes me so sad too, and I'm obviously extraordinarily sad for the humans that are impacted by this, but dogs and cats specifically are really impacted by that kind of use that you're talking about. So the sidewalks and, here and there in the landscape use. And what glyphosate can do, particularly in the presence of a surfactant called POEA, which is a highly toxic in and of itself, but glyphosate and this soapy substance, POEA, combine together and they can penetrate the skin. And so the surfactant will open up the skin and let the glyphosate in, and the glyphosate does its thing and causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so there's a huge, huge rise in cancer and lymphoma in pets. So it's just so sad because that it just goes right through their paws when they're out there. So then you extend that to, okay, so then you have kids running around barefoot. And that's another really sad one. And, it's not just glyphosate. There are some Roundup mixes that don't have glyphosate that are for use on lawns.
Mhm.
And those have 2,4-D, which, is half of Agent Orange and
Mhm.
so incredibly, incredibly toxic. So
Yeah.
those things are just so sad. And so that's sort of the dermal implications. Now on the farm, by and large, when I visited farms, the sprayers, the people that are spraying the farmers, they're sitting in a booth that is pretty well protected. And there was a big farm study where they had farmers wear patches to see just how much glyphosate exposure they were getting. And I mean, it was pretty significant, but once you were in the booth, it was not as bad. So that's sort of that impact. The other mode, of course, is dietary, but
Mhm.
actually before that, also something that particularly impacts women here, obviously, is that it also is found in GMO cotton. And so in sanitary products like tampons, that's directly inserting a GMO cotton with all kinds of chemicals and glyphosate right into those very delicate tissues. So
Mhm.
that's one that I mean, it's abysmally.
That is interesting, and I don't know how much it's really been linked. I don't know how if it is linked to cervical cancer, but it's interesting the rise of, right? And
Totally. I know.
and
I don't think anyone's looked at that yet, but wow, right? I mean,
yeah,
it makes sense. You have a carcinogen sitting right there.
yeah. So we're being exposed to this all the time, and I'm wondering what are the health consequences of that then?
Mhm. So aside from cancer, there are it's almost like there isn't a body system that isn't impacted by this chemical. And it's been able to, it's the like EPA and the companies are able to get away with it because it's just such small microdosing that it's not like it's an acute toxicity.
Mm.
So meaning that you have a little exposure every single day of your life. Well, how many, it may be in a few decades that it catches up with you, and you're not really going to be able to track it to your exposure to glyphosate because it's not really on your mind. And
Mhm.
it's very, very hard to prove when it's those subtle microdose poisonings. So
Mm.
what a big impact and where it really impacted me was in my microbiome. So it has been, in fact, recent studies just keep on proving repeatedly that this chemical, when you eat it, it at dietary doses goes into your microbiome and it kills a chunk of your good bacteria in your biome. And weirdly, it does not impact the more pathogenic bacteria. It
Mm.
selects for the good bacteria and it kills that bacteria. So it not only does that, but it also interacts with the functioning of the gut lining. So this idea of leaky gut, which people may or may not know about, but um, so historically in the way we're built, all of the toxins are supposed to stay inside of your intestine and not leach out into your bloodstream. So when you're eating something and something's bad, it's supposed to just go right on through you into the feces.
Mhm.
Well, something started happening to the integrity of our gut lining. And, I say something, but you could really, really closely tie it from when we started particularly spraying our grains with glyphosate. And it has been shown to have a biochemical reaction with those little junctions that are in our intestine, open them up and let toxins into our bloodstream. So then your body starts reacting, and inflammation is crazy, and autoimmunity happens, and just a host of problems. So that really is one of the biggest modes that you see a lot of issues. But it has been proven also to really be an endocrine disruptor. So meaning that it can mess with hormones and reproduction, frighteningly reproduction. And to the point that I actually sent 3 sperm samples into a lab from 3 different people, and all 3 came back positive for glyphosate in the semen. So you see these sperm counts that are dwindling, and we know from in lab studies that glyphosate directly interacting with sperm causes early sperm death. And so that is happening to all our men that are walking around there. It impacts testosterone levels, estrogen levels. It impacts how much we ovulate. It is actually changing the physiology of our baby girls. There was a study that was done that was able to, so they tested the urinary levels of glyphosate in second trimester women. And then they noticed that for the pregnant women that had the highest levels of glyphosate, the distance between the anus and the vagina in those girls had changed and was starting to become androgenized. So then you kind of look at that, and atrazine, which is the second most used pesticide that we have in herbicide, it is very much an endocrine disruptor. And in fact, just, there's a very famous study from Dr. Tyrone Hayes that showed that amphibians and these frogs that he was testing were literally changing sexes, which is just horrendous. So you see this endocrine disruption, not just from glyphosate, but from several of these pesticides. So that's a terrifying one. And finally, I mean, the list goes on of many different things that it does, which is horrible, but it's now been connected, like, higher levels of glyphosate seem to give you a higher probability of having ADHD and depression because of the neurological impacts. So I just wonder if you just stopped spraying this on our grains. So the scientist or the agricultural economist, Chuck Membrook, estimates that 80% of our dietary exposure comes from grains that are sprayed with this as a pre-harvest aid. So if you just eliminated that practice, the exposure would dramatically drop. And I'd be fascinated to see if then maybe our, I think it's a $4 trillion healthcare bill now might start to come down.
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? So, and so Roundup is used in a few different ways in farming, right? So one, it's used on the GMO crops, genetically modified food that has been designed and programmed so that Roundup can be sprayed on it so that it lives and Roundup will kill all the weeds. So that's one way. And then sometimes it can be used before planting a crop or after harvesting a crop just for weed kill, right? Or sprayed on a field that they're wanting to do a no-till plant into. And then it can also be used, what you're talking about, he's mentioned a few times, is it's like desiccating a crop. So it's like ripening it. So this is what we're talking about, which is where the link might be being made more, is that spraying wheat, and there's some other grains that are sprayed too, right before, like we're talking right before harvest. So the crops are getting soaked with this glyphosate, and it has helped the grains ripen faster, and then they get harvested and they get made into flour, made into cereals, put into all your foods, and then you're eating them. And that stuff is not getting washed off. It's not getting, and it doesn't, it's there.
Yeah, it's there. And that is an interesting thing, because you'll see the front groups, Crop Life recently made a post on Instagram, just, don't worry about glyphosate, just wash it off. I mean, that's not the way this works.
No, it's not. Aren't the molecules of glyphosate so small that they actually permeate the blood-brain barrier? So
yes.
The fact
Yes,
that it's once it's like absorbed right into the grain when it's sprayed onto the grain.
it totally is. And as like it ripens, it captures all of that glyphosate that's moved up through the plant, and so and particularly into the fruit. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
and another
designed, yeah, so it's designed to actually desiccate, so dry the wheat and dry the oats before they are harvested. And that's why glyphosate is so powerful, because it's designed to dry things out, desiccate them.
yeah, and just the massive amounts of expense with that. But I've spoken to farmers who do use it as a tool, and
Mhm.
the problem is that the labor, they say that the labor that it would entail to not desiccate would potentially be prohibit halting it. And so that's something to think. And I don't know whether, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not true. I'm sure in some cases that is true. But from what I understand, you can still do it the old fashioned way and just let it dry and just modify what the tools are that you're using.
Right. Well, I'll say grain country. I live in Saskatchewan. And I can tell you for sure that part of the challenge is some of the farms are just so big and they have so much to harvest. The sooner they can get into the field to start harvesting, the sooner they're finished the harvest. And so that's part of the way that the tool is being used. And because if a person has less land or more equipment, they could, in fact, let it ripen appropriately. The other thing I think that sometimes we struggle with as farmers is a shorter growing season sometimes. And that's if we get into the fields late and we don't get it planted in time, then you run into a vulnerable time where it might not ripen before frost hits and before the season changes. And so if that happens, then you run the potential of losing your whole crop. So I can see it really feeling important for them to do at that point as well. The challenge though is it's being used as and presented as a must to and a need to, and we're not leaning into our actual human intelligence and life intelligence.
Totally. And I really sympathize with the farmer, because it's easy for me to sit here and say, "You just stop using it, it's poisoning us all." But I mean, for them,
Mhm.
it's their income. If
That's
they,
right.
exactly what you're saying, like, if the frost is coming and they can't do it, then they're out. Like no one else is punished but them.
That's right.
So
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of learning that we have to do. And thanks for people like you who are educating us. If you
oh,
get
yeah.
to move the needle, right? Just a little bit every single
Yeah.
time. And even the fact that, I mean, it's still pretty vulnerable being an organic farmer in a lot of parts of the world. And even though the industry is growing, um, it's still vulnerable. And at the same time, there's more people who are using sprays that are looking, going, what is that thing? Yeah, I heard something about that. One of my neighbors who I work quite closely with, he's like, he knows I farm organically here. And he's like, yeah, I heard something about someone doing crop rotation because he runs cattle. So I'm asking every time he comes over, I'm like, so are you doing this? Or have you ever thought about that? Or what do you think about this? What
Oh,
do you
yeah.
think? Yeah. So asking really powerful questions can be helpful. Um, Kelly, so when like, so do you mind me asking, um, you noticed your health was falling apart. You identified and linked that that gluten might have had something to do with it. So you started to eat gluten or eliminate gluten, and you started to feel better. And then you took it further and understood the link to what's being sprayed on our foods, the glyphosate. And then from the time that you noticed, like from the time that you switched to a gluten-free diet to linking it to the chemicals, glyphosate specifically, that's being sprayed onto our foods, how long did it take for you to notice improvements in your health from the day you started to make the changes to the day where you're like, oh, this is helping, this is working? Like, was that a week? Was it 3 months? Was it years? How long was it?
It was amazing, because it was like probably, I would say, 3 weeks
Wow.
at that time. And it's not like I was 100%, but I just could tell something was different and I was doing better.
Mhm.
I mean, it took years to heal from where I was. in
Yeah.
such a bad state. But that was really the turning point. And I thank goodness this doctor recommended it to me. Oh my gosh. So I just started, I didn't even think organic yet at that point. So I was just eating whatever that was gluten free. And that was actually enough to give me that first step. And then I was going to go in and get endoscopy actually to just check and see, but you have to be eating gluten when you do that. And they go and they check for celiac. Actually, my sister has celiac disease. My blood test came back negative for celiac. And I was going to do that. So I had to have a gluten challenge about 3 weeks in, and I tried some gluten. Oh my gosh, did I get sick? Like all the symptoms came really pronounced, particularly the extra intestinal ones. So the neurological things. And to this day, if I'm cross-contaminated, I get this certain buzzing that I'm like, oh no, because it's always neurological, which I think
Wow.
is why so many people miss it. Like, I think because you would think that it's going to be diarrhea or whatever it is, like some gastro symptom. But for me, it was neurological, which is so.
So can you explain to me what that means when you say it was neurological? What was that
Oh,
feeling?
yeah. So the neurological system. So for me, it would be like a really strange kind of headache in like a migraine type of thing. And it would be like a tingling numbness in my extremities. In fact, like it's weird, like 2 of my toes can kind of go numb when I'm exposed to gluten. And I mean, it's very specific and very strange. And I actually, then my son was having crippling ocular migraines at the time as well. And so I was like, huh, this is interesting. And so I made him gluten free. He has not had a migraine now in 8 years since he started being gluten free.
Wow.
And so, and what's amazing is then we went to the doctor and they're like, oh, so you're gluten free. Well, that's really hard. And he's like, yeah, but I feel better. And the doctor said, well, I think you should start slowly reintroducing the gluten because I mean, I was like, why would we do that? He was on these medications for migraines.
Oh, wow. So, and then you transition to the organic. Are you on an organic?
Now I eat mostly organically, unless, when you eat out, it's just hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
But in our house, we're organic.
Yeah. So have you kept gluten out of all of your diets then?
Yeah. So actually now my whole thing, I mean, it's going to seem extreme, but so then my daughter was having digestive problems. I don't think everyone's gluten intolerant, by the way, but it
Yeah.
just so happens that my daughter was having digestive issues. And so I'm like, okay, let's try it. Okay, her digestive issues went away. Then my poor husband, like I actually don't think he needed to be gluten free, but because our kitchen was gluten free, he was eating really just entirely gluten free. And then he started noticing when he would have like a big baguette or something, he would like have some issues. And so poor guy. So now he's gluten free too, because he's like, I just feel better. And I think that is in part not only due to the protein that tends to be inflammatory in gluten, but also the massive glyphosate exposure that comes with it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what's your experience with using organic gluten, or have you tested that at
I
all?
haven't. Well, there is one time, and what? Actually, people are like, "Oh, in Europe they don't use these sprays." Actually, they do use a lot of sprays over there. I didn't fully understand that until I went to go visit some farms, and I was like, "Oh, you guys are fully using glyphosate, even in France."
Mm.
But anyway, I was in Scandinavia, in Copenhagen, which is home to Joe and the Juice, and which is if you guys don't have one, it's a smoothie juicery that is around the world now, and we have some in California. And
Okay.
so I went to Joe and the Juice there. I was really excited, and I said, "Oh, can I have that gluten-free muffin?" And they said, "Oh, sure." So I bought that. It was the best muffin like maybe I've ever had in my life. And I came back the next day, and I was like, "Can I have the gluten-free muffin?" That's not gluten-free. I was like, "What? I ate it yesterday." And so it was a great blind study because I was like, okay, something here I'm not reacting to. So I was so excited I
Wow.
got another one. So,
That's giving me goosebumps.
uh,
And it was organic.
and it was organic, yeah.
Yeah. That is fascinating, right?
Isn't it? And so then I came back to the Joe and the Juice in California, and I'm like, how come there is not a single? So these are like $15 smoothies. So like you're splurging even to do this. And then I realized, oh my gosh, not a single ingredient here is organic. What the heck? Why would I ever buy this again
In California.
in California? I'm calling out Joe and the Juice because I'm really irritated by that.
Yeah, I get it. I totally
Yeah.
get it. Especially because there's an association. If there's an association with it being organic and then it's not, That's hard.
Yeah.
Very there's a lot of misunderstanding that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But
I was
eating organically is not cheap. And,
Mhm.
particularly with rising grocery prices right now, it is expensive. I mean, you are on a farm, so hopefully you're bringing in your own, own stuff.
Yeah. So what do you do, Kelly? How do you how do you manage? Because I don't go to the grocery store very often, and I was there yesterday, and I was shocked by some of the prices.
Oh my gosh.
Like the
Seems.
organic flour when I first moved to Saskatchewan, I think it was this is not bulk. So I like to buy bulk to hack the prices. So the biggest bag I can get is 2 kilograms, which isn't very big. And then that was, I think, $10 a bag for 2 kilograms of organic flour. And it's $15 now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, $14.99.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
So I'm wondering, what do you do to
So
afford organic?
I'm like you. So Costco is our big box like warehouse store here.
Mhm.
And I love them, first of all, because they stopped selling Roundup like right in 2018. I
Yeah.
mean, so amazing. And they have some alternatives that are not as toxic.
Mhm.
But they also, someone there is very pro-organic because they have great organic stuff, but you have to be ready to eat, of course, because
Yep.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
But that is a great way to do it. And, I changed my front yard into a garden. So I live in like suburbia. And so suburbia south of San Francisco. And you would think that people would be like open to a lot of gardening, but
Yep.
in my neighborhood, it's kind of like, I don't know, just homes very similar, all with grass. And this last year, I decided that that's it. Like, this is expensive. I'm going to start growing my own. So I changed my front grass into a whole place with all these planter boxes. And I grew all my summer veggies and lettuce and everything. I still have carrots going right now. And but you know what? Someone reported me to the city, and
Mhm.
but it was so confusing to me. And actually, the city didn't come after me for it because they're like, I mean, her crops are shorter than a bush, so why would that matter? Just because it's edible. So that was the
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, I'm so grateful to hear that they didn't make you stop, because that is one of the issues with turning your yard into, or your front yard, particularly, into a garden. So, yeah, that's really cool. So what else do you do? So
Now
you
they
buy
got
bulk?
now my neighborhood, they're like, oh, we enjoy your farm. Most people loved it. And they're like, actually, I'm really excited because my next door neighbor this next upcoming growing season is going to plant hers. And so then we can plant different stuff and start exchanging and swapping. Like,
Awesome.
so excited.
Oh, that's a good idea. I love
Right.
it.
And so
Ah.
it does show you can do it in a small scale with people that are like-minded. I mean, it's exciting. It's fun.
Yeah, it's so true. And so Costco is a great place to buy bulk. And it's not just some fresh foods. They also have a lot of bulk canned foods, which I noticed, bulk canned
Do.
organic foods. And then, another place where I noticed, I I'm not a huge big box shopper either. And I heard that Walmart had organic food in it. And so I went looking, like, specifically, and it's totally true. Certified organic, and a jar of spaghetti sauce. It was for sure more expensive um than the regular
Mhm.
sauce, but it was still, I think, $4 for three something for a big jar, which
Wow.
is pretty affordable.
Yeah, that is
Like,
amazing.
when you're looking for organic foods and your cost comparing. So that I thought was really a cool idea.
I know the
Anything
Walton family at Walmart is really getting behind the regenerative agriculture movement. And many
else?
are starting to see that connection in that family. Thank goodness, because obviously the wealth is huge. So the amount that they can influence the movement, fantastic. So
Yeah, it's big, like in the fruit and vegetables area, but also in the processed food, so the canned stuff.
oh
And
my gosh, it's such great
yeah,
news.
yeah, it was really cool to see. Yeah. And I live in a small community, like, I'm not in the big cities. So I'm guessing that even in the big cities, it's even more of a selection.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So anything else? Buy bulk.
But
growing
now that you
garden.
say that, like Target actually has some pretty good deals, and they also are coming in with more organic things. I like that.
Okay.
Weirdly, Safeway is really expensive, and I don't know,
Mhm.
I don't really know why. Trader Joe's is a huge disappointment on the organic front.
Mm.
That should be more affordable. But yeah, so and of course going to farmers markets, which I do and
Yeah,
I love, and every single Saturday I go and do that. Now
yeah,
I'm a favorite farmer, you know.
yeah. That's
And
awesome.
so and that's just so much fun. And another thing to note is that a lot of these I usually go over and I'll ask the farmer if it doesn't have the certified organic label on it, and I'll say like, what are
Mhm.
your practices? You know, like what do you use? What do you not use? And like in the, I mean, unless someone's lying, which would be really horrible. But by and large, you know, a lot of these farmers, it's really expensive to get the organic certification. And so they're not doing that because they can't
Mhm.
afford to, but they're also doing the practices that are really healthy and great. And so finding
Mhm.
out who those farmers are and supporting them.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. Especially there are more and more smaller farmers who are just finding that leap to certify expensive. It's the cost actually isn't that much. Like if for a basic certification, it's still though, that $500 or $600 is a lot when you're making maybe $10,000 a year on
yeah,
all of
right.
your produce, right? So, and that's, I mean, realistically, that's where some farmers start, is that's what their income is in a year for their first harvest. So um
That's hard to live on.
yeah, it is, right? So what about so one of the questions that I see a lot is around the pasture raised. And first of all, I want to presence that I love the movement towards pasture raised and non-GMO feed being used for the chickens and the pigs and the cows and all the things. And I'm also curious about because some people are linking raised with no chemicals. And I'm wondering
Oh,
um,
that's
if
interesting.
that's true for you, or and what your thoughts are around that, and what questions we can ask, and what conversations we can maybe have to like elevate the conversation around the use of glyphosate on the feed that they're feeding that might be not
Oh yeah,
GMO'd.
'cause some of that animal feed is just completely, I mean, so bad. I visited, sadly,
Mm,
there was a system in Iowa, and there was a CAFO, and right next to the GMO corn and soy fields. And so they did the
mhm,
harvest of the corn, like directly went over and dropped off over at the CAFO. And you know, you just look at these incredibly sick cows, like, oh my gosh, so sad. Like just staring them in the eye. And actually, that was the last time I ever ate red meat. Not really because I'm like, don't ever eat meat, but because like I feel like I had a relationship then with that. It's
mhm,
kind of a drag for my family because they all really love eating meat. Um, but anyway, well, I just don't eat steak. But
yeah,
um, absolutely, when you think about this, the levels that are permitted on animal feed, not only for like these animals that we then end up eating, but also actually our pets, is it's so sky high and not considered. And so you're right with the pasture raised thing, that doesn't really mean anything at all. That's just, you know, I guess you can say from a humanitarian standpoint, because it's not
mhm,
inside of a factory, which is good.
mhm,
But outside of that, you're eating what they ate. And so if you're eating something, an animal that definitely has bioaccumulated these chemicals in their body and their tissues, which we know it can do,
mhm.
and you're not expecting to have the same kind of effects as the very sick animal that has eaten it, then that's really missing the boat. But yeah, I think a lot of awareness needs to come there. So you need to really be looking for the organically fed, organic, like grass fed, you know, animal is probably the ideal.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, that's good clarity.
How, so I do wonder if people wonder when will I stop being like this 8 girl. And I, you know, so occasionally you'll see these things, or these announcements where, oh yay, you know, glyphosate is going to be banned, and I get really excited. And then people are like, oh, then what will you do with your life? Because like 100% on this. But, you know, there, of course, there's a very long line of pesticides. Um, but and I would say to your audience too, like, what more can be done? Because I have done like large petitions. I have talked to government representatives. I've spoken at the EPA. I've done, all of trying to make public awareness higher. And I think I would just turn the question back as to like, what more can I do to impact this if this is like what I'm doing full time, and not seem like a crazy person at the same time? Because if you start really railing on this stuff, like to the general public, like it's very quickly, it shuts down their hearing and they don't really want to hear about it. But it's, I just so strongly feel that the biggest impact we could possibly make on public health would be to stop spraying this chemical. I know it, and I think the evidence points to it, and it just has to happen. And so how that happens, I'm thinking about every single day.
So what would you say would move the needle the most on making that happen?
I think one thing is that we do have a few friends that are in Congress that seem to care about this. So being able to change it so that we have an act, and there actually was a proposed bill that was in 2019 to halt the spray of oats because the data came out that Cheerios are just like littered with glyphosate. And it just stopped there. And so I think like Cory Booker is awesome, and I've done a few things with him, and he seems to fully understand this. And so I think elevating their voices, getting your representatives, on board with whatever bills that may come through there, and that I think is a big area of where the work needs to be done. Because my concern is that by the time most consumers understand this about their food, is going to be too late, because we're already seeing these devastating, even epigenetic changes in the children after being exposed to this. We don't even know the full extent to the damage, because some of it doesn't show up until grandchildren, at least in rat studies. So, it really needed to happen yesterday. So my hope would be that if you can get some sort of order or a bill passed to stop the pre-harvest spray, that's probably our fastest bet.
So that means picking up the phone, making a call,
Yep,
writing a letter,
exactly.
signing a petition,
Letting your neighbors know.
letting your neighbors
Starting
know.
even on like a local level, if you we actually had a little cancer pocket here locally, which was horrible from the spray being used on artificial turf
Mhm.
at high schools. And so children were getting cancer. In fact, one passed last year. It's just beyond. And so but that community now is obviously very, very well aware of Roundup and glyphosate, now understands the larger implications. So now their government officials know about it. And I think that you can even start on a very, very local level and get the awareness up.
Yeah, and just starting asking questions, right? Like I love how you started with a question. It's very powerful, Kelly. You started with a question.
Yeah, that's true. That's what happened.
Yeah. So asking the question, neighbors, have you ever heard of glyphosate? What do you think about it?
Hmm. Exactly that. And, for the people that are willing to hear when they bring it up, I found that are struggling, or their kids are struggling with health issues, just a quiet, non in your face kind of, oh, I found that when I ate organically, and this is why. And then you drop it, because it's a lot of information to take on. And not
Mm.
everyone's going to be as like thrilled to go and dig into the info like I was. And I've learned that kind of the hard way, because you learn something and you're so excited to tell people and help them, but
Yeah.
everyone has to be ready to receive that information.
Yeah. And I mean, we've heard the thread of why this is so important to you, Kelly, throughout this conversation, but why is it really important to you? Like, why does this really, really, really matter to you? What drives you?
So this really, really matters to me, because I want to be sure I can have grandchildren. And
Mm.
I think right now we're looking at a really scary future of a lack of ability to reproduce, because of what we've done to our land, not just with Roundup, but with everything. It's like you can see that nature is shutting down. They are halting our ability. Nature is halting our ability to reproduce, and that really is end of species. And that makes me terribly sad, because it's just stupidity that has gotten us here. And it's stupidity, and the way that we are treating agriculture at this point is really, really old fashioned. It's like it's a relic of World War II, and that age of pesticides that was launched out of World War II. We're past that now. We know more. It's a losing proposition. And
Mhm.
so if people realized this could vary, it's not even an exaggeration to say this is end of species. It's happening. If you read any article, New York Times is always talking about the decrease in fertility. And I always just hit my head against the wall because I'm like, I know why. Like, don't act like we don't know why. This is in our food. I mean, maybe the writer doesn't know why because it's quietly being suppressed. But every single day when I'm working on this, it really comes down to that, because I think it's a matter of like sustaining our species.
And what gives you the most hope?
People like you give me hope because you get it. You give me hope. So you're talking about it and you're spreading the information. And I think when a sane person understands this, and they're going to want to do something about it. And so, with more and more buzz around it, and I think an interesting thing that's happening on the field, which your farming people will know about, is that the weeds are outthinking the glyphosate. So they are evolving to not be affected by glyphosate. And I love that so much, because nature is just coming back and punishing right back. Like, hey, well, no, that didn't work. Try again,
That's
And
right.
unfortunately, I don't think the human genome is able to change quite so rapidly. But I feel like nature may actually save us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Nature is so wise. Like I mean, that's a whole different conversation, but it's fascinating to just learn what we're learning about the intelligence of plants and bacteria.
Oh, I love it. And there's so much more there that's brilliant that we don't even
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, we're just at the very beginning of understanding that. So, and how can we support you? How can we support you in your work that you're doing and moving forward and just carrying this conversation about glyphosate, linking it to our health and changing the way we use it to maybe even completely eliminating it?
Oh my gosh, I mean, that would be the best day. First of all, I'm going to throw a global party. We're all invited when that happens.
Awesome. I'll help you throw it.
Perfect. It's going to be the best. And I think it will happen. It will happen one day. It'll be in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So right now, so as I was mentioning earlier to you, Natalie, I am about to launch a new website, glyphosatefacts.com. And so I'm going to be keeping everyone updated on the latest information and research that comes out of all those labs that are working away diligently on this, as well as the political aspects of it. And in the meantime, you can find me on Instagram at Glyphosate Girl, where you can hear my latest musings. And hopefully within the next year, there'll be a relatively big, I'm trying to collaborate with a few different partners on some more policy issues that will definitely need as many voices as possible behind them. So I'll be sure to keep everyone updated on that.
That's really exciting. Thank you so much. And just give us a snapshot before we wrap of where your health is today. How do you feel? And where's your energy level?
Oh yeah. So, well, overall, I feel fantastic. Like I feel normal.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten what that felt like. Like, I don't think I felt normal since I was probably 14, and that was a long time ago for me. Um, and so I'm feeling really great. But if I get off of that, if I stop making my smoothies and I stop taking my supplements, like I can definitely fall back into the fatigue factor. And so I'm not eating dairy right now either. But I can kind of come and go on that. It's not like gluten for me. But what I love is that I know my health is manageable. Like it's under my control. And that's something that is such an amazing feeling after feeling so helpless and so sick and not knowing like where to turn. But now I know what I need to do. So if I, start getting fatigue and headaches, I'm like, okay, let me adjust. I need to refocus, buckle down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm standing with you in your health and with you sharing your story. And I am deeply grateful for all the work that you do. And I know you do this from your heart, and you do it because you want to make a difference, and you want to make the difference for not just yourself and your family, but your grandchildren and all of humanity and this beautiful planet Earth that we live on. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. So fun.
Pleasure. I want to honor your time, Kelly. Thank you so much. Big love.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Be sure to go find the Glyphosate Girl on Instagram And watch for her website, Glyphosate Facts. That's going to be a good one. It's going to be a place where all the resources and all the things will be for you to dig into what glyphosate is, how it impacts your health, how it is impacting our planet, and what you can do to make a difference in your home, in your community, and in your country, and on this planet Earth that we all share. You make yourself an amazing day. I am deeply grateful that you are tuned in here at Heart and Soil. Thank you so much for liking the video and sharing it with your friends. It really helps keep these conversations going about regenerative farming, gardening, and living, and helping people be healthier and helping people take control of their health, take control of where they're at on their journey, educating themselves, and really investing in themselves emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. You make yourself an amazing day, and come visit us at heartandsoilmagazine.com. We'd love to have you join our community there. Big love.